Imagine just stepping out of your apartment tomorrow morning.
Okay.
You walk down the hall, and there's a small security camera mounted right above the exit.
Pretty standard stuff these days.
Right, just privately owned by your landlord. But as you pass it, that camera instantly feeds your biometric data into a centralized state network.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and by the time you hit the street, your face has been cross-referenced with federal databases. And if an algorithm flags, I don't know, an unpaid ticket,
Right.
a digital billboard in the city square ticks up by one digit on this massive public display called a prisonometer.
A prisonometer. That is, I mean, it sounds like something straight out of a mid-century dystopian novel, you know?
Totally, like a Philip K. Dick story on a napkin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it isn't fiction. That specific scenario is the actual lived reality for millions of people in Sao Paulo, Brazil, right now in the summer of 2026.
And it perfectly encapsulates what we are tearing into today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We've got this really fascinating stack of sources from The Economist, published just a few days ago in early July, and the through line connecting all of this reporting is systems.
Systems of control, specifically,
Yeah.
and the friction of resistance against them.
Right. We are looking at this global landscape where governments, institutions, and even political factions are just inventing these entirely new mechanics. Mechanics to dictate who holds power, who gets to participate in society, and how human behavior is monitored.
And just as crucially, we're looking at how the subjects of those systems are pushing back. I mean, when you apply immense pressure to a population, whether that's through high-tech surveillance or bureaucratic mandates, you inevitably generate resistance.
So for those of you joining us, we know you're here because you want to understand the actual mechanics of the world. You are a learner. You want to look under the hood. But before we start pulling the engine apart, we need a quick disclaimer, because we are going to be touching on some incredibly raw political nerve endings today, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're covering the American political spectrum, from the fringes of the far left to the most aggressive maneuvers of the right.
Yeah, which requires a very clear statement of intent from us. Because this source material deals with highly polarized, ideologically charged actions, it is critical to state that we are operating strictly as neutral guides here.
Right. We don't take sides.
Exactly. We are not endorsing, defending, or condemning any of the political figures, state policies, or social movements we're about to discuss. Our mandate is exclusively to synthesize the reporting presented by The Economist to help you, the listener, understand the current global dialogue.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at the mechanics of identity.
Let's do it.
Usually when we think of national identity, it's, organic. It shifts slowly over generations.
Right, through culture, art, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Exactly. But The Economist reporting details how state power is being actively weaponized to legally redraw the boundaries of who belongs in America. And the biggest laboratory for this right now is Texas.
Yeah, Texas is operating as this fascinating case study in the deployment of administrative state power. The campaign spearheaded by Governor Greg Abbott, which really accelerated in early 2025, it isn't just rhetorical, it's deeply structural.
So where did this start?
Well, the catalyst was a proposed housing development by the East Plano Islamic Center. Governor Abbott publicly characterized this development as an attempt to build Sharia cities.
Let's just pause right there, because the phrase Sharia city is doing a massive amount of heavy lifting.
It really is.
I mean, the implication is that a religious minority is trying to carve out this sovereign territory within Texas, where the U.S. Constitution just no longer applies. It's framing a local zoning dispute over some houses as an existential threat to the state.
And the reaction from the government was to unleash the full weight of its bureaucratic machinery. They didn't just deny a permit, they initiated a multi-agency crackdown.
Like how many agencies?
A dozen different state regulatory bodies descended on this single organization.
Wow. And that administrative pressure escalated really fast, didn't it?
It did. By November, Governor Abbott took a step that completely bypassed traditional federal foreign policy channels. He officially designated the Council on American Islamic Relations, or KIR, as a foreign terrorist organization.
Hey, KIR is the largest Muslim civil rights organization in the United States.
Exactly. And by labeling them a foreign terrorist organization at the state level, Abbott used a legal mechanism to bar them from purchasing any land in Texas.
That is a profound exertion of control. You're using the language of national security to completely neutralize the property rights of a domestic advocacy group.
And the control doesn't stop at property rights either. It bleeds directly into the state's educational infrastructure. which is really how you ensure a narrative outlives a current administration.
Right, get it into the schools. What happened there?
Well, in March, the Texas state controller, the guy who controls the purse strings, actively shut Islamic schools out of the state's newly established school voucher program.
So public tax dollars are going to private and religious schools, but they built a firewall to ensure none of it flows to Muslim institutions.
Precisely. And the most far-reaching element happened just a couple of weeks ago, in late June 2026. The Texas State Board of Education executed a comprehensive overhaul of the public school curriculum.
What did they change?
They entirely eliminated a middle school class called World Cultures. And in high schools, they removed units historically designed to explain the foundational beliefs of Islam.
And what did they replace them with?
Units strictly focused on the teachings of jihad, specifically framing it around the historical conquest of Christian lands. And at the same time, they mandated more Bible stories across the curriculum.
I mean, that is just the complete curation of reality for millions of students. You are structurally removing the sociology of a global religion and replacing it exclusively with the theology of conflict.
And this isn't just one rogue governor, you know. This is becoming a formalized political institution. You have two Texas congressmen, Chip Roy and Keith Self, who recently founded the Sharia Free America Caucus.
Right, and they started small, but now they're up to, what, 68 members of Congress?
68 members across 25 different states. And the Texas State Republican Party formally listed Stop the Islamification of Texas as its second highest legislative priority for the year.
So to understand the why here, we really have to look at the philosophical shift on the American right. Because right after 9/11, there was a massive surge of anti-Islamic sentiment, sure.
Yeah, but that fear was fundamentally outward-looking. It was a fear of an external threat, foreign actors penetrating the borders. The reporting makes a crucial distinction about 2026. The current mobilization is driven by a fear of internal transformation. It's the fear that the American civic identity is being diluted from within.
It's like the difference between building a fortress to keep an army out and interrogating the people already inside the fortress to see if they hold the correct beliefs.
That's a really accurate way to frame it. There is a rapidly consolidating movement that seeks to fuse American civic identity inextricably with Christian values, what people broadly call Christian nationalism.
And it's not a fringe movement anymore.
Not at all. Governor Abbott explicitly stated the U.S. was founded as a Christian nation. Vice President J.D. Vance amplifies this. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, too.
Even Charlie Kirk, right before he passed away.
Right. Kirk, who just got a posthumous Presidential Medal of Freedom from Trump, argued that America was in a constitutional crisis because, and I'm quoting his underlying philosophy here, you cannot have liberty if you do not have a Christian population.
Which is just a total inversion of Enlightenment principles. I mean, the whole traditional narrative is that liberty is achieved precisely by separating the state from any specific religion.
Exactly.
But here is the statistical reality that just makes this whole thing wild to me. Muslims make up roughly 1% of the United States population. 1%.
A completely marginal demographic, statistically speaking.
Right. So mechanically, it's like watching a biological autoimmune response. The immune system is supposed to fight massive threats, but sometimes it encounters like a trace amount of a harmless peanut, and it triggers anaphylaxis.
It attacks itself.
Yes,
Yeah.
it attacks itself trying to eradicate something that isn't actually a systemic threat. When I see a dozen state agencies and a 68-member congressional caucus aimed at a 1% demographic,
Yeah.
it tells me the system is just reacting to its own internal anxieties.
And Andrew Whitehead, a researcher at the University of Indiana, he actually supports that exact reading in the piece. He suggests Muslims in America are functioning as the perfect foil.
A contrast tool.
Exactly. If a political movement wants to define what a true citizen is, the fastest way is to point to someone else and definitively state what a citizen is not. Their utility is purely acting as a visible boundary marker.
But how do politicians who have spent 50 years defending religious liberty reconcile using the state to ban another religion from buying land?
It's all about the framing. The governor's office maintains a rhetorical distinction between law-abiding Texas Muslims and bad actors allegedly subverting the Constitution.
But the people experiencing the policies don't buy that framing.
No, not at all. Shamazian from CR points out the language has shifted from Islamophobia to systemic religious persecution. She argues the unspoken objective is just to make daily life so hostile that Muslims will self-deport.
But the American system has a counterbalance, right? The courts. How are they handling this exertion of control?
They are currently acting as a very firm buffer. The court successfully blocked Texas's attempt to exclude Islamic schools from the voucher program.
Because of constitutional protections against religious discrimination.
Right. And that East Plano Islamic Center development. They filed a religious discrimination lawsuit. A federal judge appointed by Ronald Reagan, mind you, not only let it proceed but delivered a scathing rebuke.
What did the judge say?
He explicitly stated on the record that absolutely no evidence has been presented to support the claim that the mosque intended to impose Sharia law.
So the judiciary demands actual evidence while the legislature operates on narrative. And this matters because Texas is the R&D wing for national policy.
Whatever happens in Texas rarely stays in Texas.
Right. You have Congressman Randy Fine in Florida introducing bills to protect puppies from supposed Sharia bans just because his primary voters care 7 times more about this perceived threat than traditional issues like abortion.
And that desire to codify who gets to participate in the civic process isn't just happening at the state level. It is currently paralyzing the federal government in Washington over the mechanics of the ballot box.
Oh man, the SAVE Act. Let's talk about how control is being exerted through total legislative gridlock. So right now, Donald Trump is refusing to sign any legislation into law.
Even a highly popular bipartisan housing bill is sitting in limbo.
He's holding the federal apparatus hostage with one demand. Congress has to pass the SAVE Act. What does this bill actually do?
The acronym stands for Safeguard American Voter Eligibility. At its core, it alters the requirements for voter registration. Currently, you swear under penalty of perjury that you're a citizen.
Which is a pretty serious legal commitment.
It is, but the SAVE Act would change it so you have to provide physical documentary proof of citizenship to register,
So you need a valid U.S. passport or an official birth certificate just to get on the voter rolls.
along with mandatory photo ID at the polling place, and forcing states to continuously cross-reference voter databases with federal citizenship records.
To the average person, that probably sounds like basic administrative housekeeping.
And that is exactly how the architects frame it. They present it as a common-sense reform to ensure elections are reserved for citizens, boosting public confidence.
But when you look at the empirical data,
Right. The incidence of non-citizens successfully registering and casting ballots in federal elections is, according to all available state audits, vanishingly rare. It is statistically negligible.
so it's solving a problem that barely exists. And here's where it gets really interesting because the collateral damage of this bill is fascinating. The Bipartisan Policy Center ran the numbers.
And what did they find?
They estimate that if the SAVE Act went into effect tomorrow, roughly 12% of all currently registered voters would be unable to produce the required documents on short notice.
12%. That is tens of millions of people.
Yes. The bottleneck is passports. Half the country doesn't have a valid passport, so you have to dig up an original birth certificate. And this creates a massive ironic trap for Republicans.
Because of the demographic breakdown of document possession, right?
Exactly. Democrats and Republicans have qualifying docs at roughly equal rates overall, but they rely on different types. Republican voters, especially older folks in rural areas, rely way more heavily on birth certificates.
While Democrats hold passports at higher rates, and birth certificates are an absolute administrative nightmare for voter registration matching.
Why is that?
Election officials reject birth certificates at a much higher rate, mostly because of name discrepancies. If a woman's birth certificate has her maiden name, but she registered to vote under her married name, boom, it flags a mismatch.
Or even just a typo from a hospital clerk 50 years ago.
Exactly. So the practical application of the SAVE Act could very easily result in the severe disenfranchisement of Donald Trump's own political base.
So wait, if this bill solves a non-existent problem and could accidentally block millions of loyal Republican voters from the polls, why push it? Prediction markets give it a 1 in 10 chance of passing. It's a massive political gamble.
Because fundamentally, the objective is not to pass a functional law. The objective is to utilize the legislative process to construct a narrative framework.
So they want it to fail.
Legal scholars, like Alexander Chandler from Protect Democracy, identify the SAVE Act as a classic protectual bill. The entire strategy is built around its anticipated failure.
It's like going into a restaurant and aggressively demanding a dish you know isn't on the menu just so you have an excuse to flip the table and claim the staff is biased against you.
That is the exact mechanism. You demand a bill ostensibly designed to stop non-citizen voting. You watch the Democrats block it because of the disenfranchisement issues, and you successfully manufacture a pre-packaged storyline.
So if Democrats win the election, the narrative architecture is already built. They stole it using non-citizens because they refused to secure the system.
Exactly. You build the grievance directly into the timeline.
Yeah.
You don't need the law to pass. You just need the friction of the fight to be televised.
And is it working?
The polling data says yes. An Economist YouGov poll shows 82% of Republicans now believe non-citizen voting is a serious systemic issue. And overall, public trust in election counting has plummeted 17 points in 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, only 60% of Americans feel confident their votes will be accurately tallied.
So from a control perspective, it's a massive success. The spectacle of fighting the establishment is worth more to the base than the legislative reality. But ironically, while Congress is completely stalled out, the executive branch is moving with ruthless efficiency.
Thanks to an incredibly unlikely figure.
Right. Let's talk about the bureaucratic wizardry of Dr. Oz.
Dr. Mehmet Oz.
The man who spent a decade on daytime television hyping green coffee bean extract for weight loss. The guy who literally broadcast his own colonoscopy to millions of people. He is now the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS.
Which is an appointment that requires serious context, because CMS is not some ceremonial role. It is arguably the most powerful, financially consequential agency in the entire federal government.
They oversee a massive budget, right?
$1.6 trillion annually. They oversee healthcare coverage for nearly 40% of the U.S. population. They dictate pricing structures for hospitals, reimbursement rates for doctors, everything.
When he was nominated, the healthcare policy world was an absolute horror. It felt like putting a true crime podcaster in charge of the FBI. But The Economist reports that 14 months into the job, he is absolutely thriving.
He really is. It's like a hospital drama where the eccentric wildcard doctor somehow ends up being the best administrator in the building.
And it's such a sharp contrast to the rest of the Trump administration's health sector right now.
Right, which is defined by chaos. The CDC lacks an acting director. The FDA commissioner just resigned over an e-cigarette policy dispute. The Surgeon General spot is vacant. But Oz is succeeding because he actually understands and respects the mundane machinery of government.
He actually talks to the people who did the job before him, right?
Yep. Yeah, he consults with former CMS administrators in both the Bush and Obama administrations. He hires staff with decades of relevant bureaucratic experience. He's using traditional competence to achieve non-traditional ideological goals.
So what is he actually achieving with all that power?
Well, he pushed through the enforcement of the OBBBA bill, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It mandates a strict 80-hour monthly work requirement for anyone receiving Medicaid benefits.
And he's enforcing it so aggressively that multiple Democrat-run states are suing him just to slow him down.
He is totally weaponizing the compliance process, but he also knows how to distribute rewards.
Yeah.
He recently launched a pilot program allowing select individuals on Medicare to access GLP-1 weight loss medications for just $50 a month.
Let's unpack that, because GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic or Wegovy, they are incredibly effective, but astronomically expensive.
Upwards of $1,000 a month out of pocket, usually.
Right. So by subsidizing this down to $50 a month for a pilot group that could reach 4 million people, Oz is dropping a financial nuclear bomb into the healthcare market. He is delivering a highly visible, incredibly popular benefit to seniors.
But where his daytime TV background perfectly synergizes with federal power is his crusade against fraud. He has turned bureaucratic auditing into a spectator sport.
Explain that, because it sounds crazy.
He personally invites members of the press to tag along on heavily armed federal law enforcement stings targeting alleged healthcare fraudsters.
So you have the administrator of a $1 trillion insurance program showing up in a flak jacket with cameras rolling.
It's pure visual strategy.
Yeah.
He recently accused the Russian-Armenian mafia of operating a massive Medicare fraud ring in L.A. and blanketed social media with the narrative.
Which prompted California Governor Gavin Newsom to file a civil rights complaint, calling the rhetoric racially charged.
And Dr. Oz just hopped on X and posted that Newsom would engage in any distraction to avoid addressing the massive theft of taxpayer dollars under his watch.
It is the weaponization of reality television tactics to achieve bureaucratic control. And it highlights a Trumpian pattern, right? You find a genuine problem because Medicare fraud is a massive, real issue, but you enforce it in a way that inflicts maximum political damage on your rivals.
Exactly. Oz sent letters to all 50 governors, warning them to audit medical providers in high-risk areas.
Yeah.
But he included a threat. Failure to comply would negatively impact how CMS evaluates their state's overall funding applications.
And he's used that to try and freeze $1.6 billion of federal Medicaid spending for California and Minnesota.
Which is why Minnesota Governor Tim Walz called the operation political retribution.
You use the shield of fiscal responsibility to starve the budgets of blue states. It just shows that true competence in government can come from the most unexpected resumes. Dr. Oz realized that managing the mundane machinery allows you to reward your allies with cheap drugs and punish your enemies with armed audits.
So we've seen how the right is aggressively consolidating narrative and power. The natural question is, how's the left responding?
And the answer seems to be by struggling with radical fringes that are alienating everyday voters.
The Economist calls it the left's common sense problem on crime. And just to do a quick neutrality check here, we aren't evaluating the moral superiority of either side's criminal justice philosophy. We are analyzing political strategy and voter perception.
And the data for Democrats on this is grim.
Very grim. Recent YouGov polling shows Republicans are trusted more on crime by an 8-point margin, 39% to 31%.
Which is absurd when you think about it. Donald Trump has 34 felony convictions, yet the American electorate trusts the party led by a convicted felon significantly more to maintain law and order. How does a party fail so spectacularly at messaging?
It's rooted in the outsized impact of the progressive fringe. The mainstream Democratic platform, led by folks like Joe Biden, has consistently advocated for increased police funding. But the activist wing has embraced rhetoric that the median voter finds deeply unsettling.
The article highlights a specific story from the Netroots Nation conference to illustrate this, the story of Felix Rosado.
Right. Felix Rosado was convicted of murder and spent 27 years in state prison. By all accounts, he is genuinely remorseful and now runs a project promoting restorative justice.
Which, in its traditional form, actually has some bipartisan support, the idea of criminals making concrete amends to victims.
Yes, but Rosado's philosophy goes way beyond that. He advocates for the complete abolition of both police departments and the prison system entirely.
He wants to dismantle the state's monopoly on violence.
He spoke about a society where physical cages are unnecessary and where the people in the community determine what justice looks like when a violent crime occurs.
And it's not just activists. The Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, provides crucial endorsements for major candidates. They only recently scrubbed the explicit demand for prison abolition from their platform.
But the candidates they back still use the rhetoric. A DSA-endorsed House candidate in New York, Dario Avila Chevalier, refused 4 separate times in an interview to say that murderers should be locked up in prison.
And you have massive online influencers like Hassan Piker telling the New York Times that bank robberies are cool because they punish big corporations.
This rhetoric ignores the basic mechanics of human behavior. The Economist piece points out the moral idiocy of ignoring incentives. A society operates on deterrence. If you remove the consequence of a cage, what deters a violent predator?
The author draws a really sharp economic parallel here. Extreme left-wing crime policies ignore human behavior the exact same way extreme rent control ignores market incentives. If you implement draconian rent control, developers mathematically stop building housing. If you remove the credible threat of incarceration, you remove the friction against criminal behavior.
And when the formal state-run system is dismantled, it isn't replaced by peaceful mediation. The author illustrates this with an anecdote about witnessing community justice in an under-policed market in Zambia.
Oh, that was a brutal story.
It was. A suspected thief was caught, and there were no restorative circles. A crowd just grabbed him, beat him, and dragged him away. When the state relinquishes control, society defaults to mob justice.
Oh, wait, let me push back on this a little. Violent crime in the U.S. has actually fallen significantly since 2021. Murder rates are down. And mainstream Democrats unequivocally support the police. Why is this fringe rhetoric hurting them so much?
It's the vibes theory of politics, entirely dictated by algorithmic control. Social media algorithms optimize for outrage and extremism, not nuance.
Right. The algorithm loves a controversial soundbite.
Exactly. When an influencer says bank robberies are a legitimate form of wealth redistribution, that clip goes viral. Republican strategists don't debate the moderate Democratic mayor who lowered the homicide rate. They just take the viral clip of the DSA candidate and use it to paint the entire party as radical anarchists.
And the left is losing the narrative because they won't forcefully marginalize those extreme voices. And this isn't just an abstract messaging problem. It is actively imploding their electoral map. Case in point, the collapse of Graham Plattner in Maine.
The Plattner saga is a masterclass in how political desperation causes an institution to willfully ignore massive red flags. Maine is a must-win seat for the Democrats to control the Senate.
And Graham Plattner, the Democratic nominee, looked perfect on paper. Plain-spoken oyster farmer, former Marine, a working-class hero aesthetic.
But he brought a staggering amount of baggage. First, a tattoo resembling a white supremacist symbol, which he claimed was a misunderstanding. Then, a history of incredibly toxic, misogynistic posts on Reddit.
But the party apparatus looked at the polling and decided to push him through anyway. Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders threw their full weight behind him.
They ignored the warning signs because the tactical need for a populist brawler overrode their vetting process. But in June, a former partner, Lindsay Fifield, went public with allegations of severe physical aggression.
And the initial reaction from the party was denial, right? Senator Sheldon Whitehouse went on TV and suggested it was a right-wing psyop.
That denial held until early July, when a second former girlfriend, Jenny Rasico, came forward with much more severe allegations of sexual assault. Plattner denied it, but the campaign became untenable. On July 8th, he dropped out via an erratic 11-minute selfie video.
Where he blamed the corporate media system instead of taking accountability. So what does this mean mechanically for the Democrats? They have a ticking clock now.
Right, the legal deadline to withdraw was July 13th. Now the party has exactly 2 weeks to scramble and select a replacement candidate to face the incumbent, Susan Collins.
Couldn't they just run Governor Janet Mills, who they sidelined for Plattner?
They could, but she polls very poorly against Collins. The tragedy here is that The Economist's modeling shows a completely generic Democratic candidate would actually be a 5-point favorite to win this race.
So they were so desperate to find a Trump-era brawler that they abandoned their own #MeToo principles right up until the exact moment the optics became unsurvivable. It's a stunning failure of institutional control.
It really is. Now, I want to shift our focus globally because the mechanics of control change drastically depending on the tools a state has. While America battles over ideology, Brazil is utilizing technology to exert absolute physical control over its streets.
Let's talk about Smart Sampa in São Paulo. It's a digital dragnet of unprecedented scale. They have 50,000 cameras now, scaling to 100,000 by 2028. And these are high-definition lenses with real-time facial recognition.
And they installed this massive digital billboard in the city center called the prisonometer,
which literally tallies the exact number of arrests the police have made using the camera system in real time. It is the gamification of authoritarian control.
The software constantly scans faces, cross-references them with criminal databases, and automatically dispatches police to the exact geolocation if it flags a match. The cameras are everywhere on buses, in health centers, even on police motorcycle helmets.
It totally brings to mind Terry Gilliam's movie Brazil. But the vital question is, does this massive invasion of privacy actually work?
The government claims it's a massive success, pointing to thousands of arrests in the prisonometer. But independent researchers point to catastrophic systemic flaws, the biggest one being algorithmic racial bias.
Right. The data from Rio de Janeiro is shocking. 80% of wrongful arrests generated by facial recognition involve Black Brazilians. 80%.
Yeah.
Why is the failure rate so obscenely high?
It comes down to how AI is trained. The massive data sets used to train these models are overwhelmingly skewed toward white male faces. Because the system has less data on darker skin tones and struggles with contrast and lower lighting, it makes significantly more errors.
And when a biased system has the power to dispatch armed police, the results are devastating. But even beyond the bias, is it actually reducing crime?
An independent think tank found absolutely no statistical reduction in thefts or homicides in São Paulo during the system's first year compared to cities without it.
Because it's a high-tech Band-Aid on a broken judicial system. In São Paulo, police only solve about 2% of recorded thefts. If 98% of criminals know they won't face consequences, cameras don't change the incentive structure.
And organized crime in Brazil has evolved way past street cameras anyway. Organizations like the PCC are transnational conglomerates now.
They control supply chains for fuel, illegal gold mining. In 2022, they generated roughly $29 billion from legitimate-seeming markets. Cameras can't catch a white-collar syndicate laundering gold.
Yet the city spends $118 million a year on Smart Sampa because politicians need visible metrics, like the prisonometer, to show they are taking action.
What's truly insidious to me is the integration of private data. The mayor admitted that more than half the cameras feeding the network are privately owned by landlords and shopping centers. Imagine walking into your apartment knowing your landlord's camera is feeding your biometric data to the state.
That level of inescapable digital tracking inevitably brings a society to a breaking point,
Yeah.
which perfectly sets the stage for the youth resistance. Faced with this inescapable digital web, Gen Z is actively rejecting it.
The Summer of Lud in New York, a tech-free festival where they instituted an absolute ban on smartphones. The crowds were chanting, "We will free the iPad babies," and demanding, "No Gemini, no GPT."
They even held a mock trial for digital devices and literally executed them by smashing them.
The statistics beneath this trend are wild. Nearly 25% of Gen Z wish smartphones were never invented. Over 50% support banning social media for kids under 16. And 70% fear AI will take their jobs.
And unlike the 19th century Luddites who feared for their physical livelihoods, today's youth fear for their psychological livelihoods. They are rejecting the attention economy, the algorithms, the doom scrolling.
But the profound irony is how this is spreading. This offline movement is being popularized online.
Right, via TikTok and Pinterest. Influencers are rebranding analog life as a luxury aesthetic. A TikTok video with millions of views encourages people to ditch Spotify for an old-school click-wheel iPod.
It feels like an aesthetic trend for kids who don't remember getting lost without Google Maps.
It's easy to dismiss, but the psychological benefits are real. Nick Plante, a 25-year-old developer who gave up his smartphone, said the biggest milestone wasn't a career thing. It was finally being able to read a book all the way through without losing focus.
Reclaiming human attention as political resistance. I love that. Now, while American youth unplug from the digital web, Mexico is spending billions to plug the physical world back together.
President Claudia Sheinbaum is placing an enormous bet on physical infrastructure. She wants to build 3,000 kilometers of new passenger rail by 2030.
Which is massive because Mexico basically abandoned passenger rail in the 90s, and they are seeing some early successes like the El Insurgente line from Toluca to Mexico City.
Right, it turns a grueling multi-hour traffic jam into a smooth one-hour train ride for under $6. It's a massive upgrade.
But they have the shadow of the previous administration's Tren Maya hanging over them.
The Tren Maya is a cautionary tale. Driven by political timelines, it caused devastating environmental damage to underground cenotes, and the stations were built in completely illogical locations miles away from city centers.
So Scheinbaum is trying to apply rigorous logic, connecting contiguous metro areas, but the economics of passenger rail are brutal. Very few systems globally make a profit.
Exactly. An analyst points out that by diverting billions into subsidized passenger rail, Mexico risks siphoning funds from the freight rail and maritime ports that actually drive their industrial growth.
It's a debate over the vascular system of the country. And strategically, she's moving away from relying on the military to build these things, right?
Yes, she's courting private capital for stations and signaling, moving to a public-private partnership model.
Which introduces the tension between political speed and engineering quality. We saw the tragic result of that in December with the interoceanic railway derailment where 14 people died. Speed versus quality is the ultimate test.
And building all this track requires immense amounts of raw material, specifically copper, which brings us to a fierce border clash over whose land and rights matter most.
Up in British Columbia's Golden Triangle, there's a massive copper mine expansion at Red Chris, backed by $350 million from the Canadian government.
And they secured the legal consent of the local Tahltan Nation. The Tahltan used their leverage to win high-paying jobs and a $10,000 payout per member for a nearby project.
A triumph of economic self-determination for them. But the ecological reality is that pollution doesn't stop at the border. The mine is on a tributary feeding the Stikine River, which flows south into Alaska.
Where the Tlingit people rely on that river for salmon and their entire way of life. They're terrified of toxic tailings washing downstream. But because they live on the American side, they get zero say in how the mine operates.
It's a geographic paradox. Ecological consequences ignore borders, but legal jurisdiction strictly enforces them. And the hypocrisy of the state is glaring. BC promotes indigenous rights globally, but passed a law explicitly locking Alaskan tribes out of environmental decisions.
The Tahltan basically said, we don't recognize the Alaskan claims. It encroaches on our sovereign rights. How do you reconcile two valid indigenous claims when a border slices their ecosystem in half?
So how are the Tlingit fighting back?
They are petitioning the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and filing lawsuits in the BC Supreme Court, relying on a 2021 Canadian precedent that cross-border tribes could have rights in Canada. They are trying to punch a jurisdictional hole right through the border.
It's an incredible story of systemic resistance, and it really brings us full circle. From politicians in Texas dictating religious identity to the federal gridlock over the SAVE Act, Dr. Oz shaking up the CMS bureaucracy.
The left struggle with extreme ideology, Brazil's facial recognition dragnets, Gen Z destroying their phones, and indigenous tribes battling over copper mines from Mexico's railways.
It is a world entirely consumed with grasping for and rebelling against systems of control.
But I want to leave our listeners with this final thought. We've seen states use digital tools to erase boundaries and physical infrastructure to conquer distance. But the ultimate irony of 2026 might be this. As our world becomes hyper-connected, we are increasingly defining ourselves by what we choose to block out. Whether that's a neighboring religion in Texas, a neighboring tribe in Alaska, or the glowing screen in our own pockets. Are we building a connected world or just more sophisticated walls?
That is the defining question. To you, the learner, keep examining the blueprints of the systems around you. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.